Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Airborne, Are We There Yet? I'm Dan McDonald from Baxter Media, and today is Wednesday, May 27th. Now, just before we get into things, I'd like to check in with our viewers to let them know that if you have any questions at all during this webinar, just type them into the Q&A box, which is found in your Zoom toolbar, and those questions will be answered in due time. There will also be a couple of polls taking place today, so be sure to contribute answers to those questions so that your voice is heard. Speaking first today is Barbara Dirnberger, Vice President of Business Development for Airline Metrics. Barbara has a very extensive background in airline management, having worked for Swiss Air and Malaysian Airlines, as well as consulting for Hong Kong Airlines and others. Hi, Barbara. Thanks so much for being here. And welcome Robert and Gavin as well.
Hi, Dan. Thanks very much. And welcome, everyone. This is really exciting. This is fun. I hope that you're going to find today very engaging, very interesting. We're going to keep it open as a discussion. I have the privilege, of introducing our two panelists. And you will see Mr. Gavin Eccles. He is Managing Partner of GE Consulting. Gavin has worked across the world to make the link between aviation and tourism development and has been associated with airlines, hotels, airports, and tour operators. Previous roles have included development in British Airways, as well as consultancy projects for United, American, Qantas, and even supporting the development of some low-cost carriers. So we have a lot of experience here. Welcome, Gavin.
Thank you, Barbara.
And we also have Mr. Rob Rennert. Mr. Rennert is also another aviation veteran. Robert was actually the director of network planning at Porter Airlines in 2018, where he oversaw a doubling of the company's growth in both aircraft and destinations. Throughout his career, Mr. Rennert has focused on exploring the deployment and new alternative service delivery concepts for some low-cost carriers. And he was also part of the architecture planning of the expansion of our Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport in the 2010s. So welcome, Robert.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Happy to be here.
Gentlemen, this is going to be a really interesting little time here that we're going to have. I almost said this afternoon, but we're not taking the afternoon. So Airborne, are we there yet? That's really the big question. COVID-19 is a global pandemic with global social industry consequences, the scale of which we all agree has never been seen or experienced before. It stopped almost every single citizen on the planet in their tracks, or it's drastically altered their life paths. The magnitude of this event in our lifetime is pretty breathtaking. So I believe that I can make this comment now because it's said by a former president. The shit we're in today is the fertilizer of tomorrow. I think we're in pretty deep. So here we are today. We're going to talk about the airline industry. We're going to try and make sense of some of the barrage of the daily headlines, try to find some logic in what's happened to our businesses and what might still happen to our businesses. And as Dan mentioned at the outset, we're going to run two polls during this webinar. We're going to run one right now at the outset, and then we're going to run the exact same one at the end. And our intention is just to see the impact of the comments you're going to hear today on your before and after thoughts. So let me just see if I can get this. There we go. Now, this poll is totally anonymous. We're just trying to gauge how you feel. When do you feel that travel and tourism will start to return? Would that be sometime in 2020, 21, 22, 23? Have we got optimists, pessimists, realists? We just want to, this is great. We're seeing it come in live. This is very cool.
That's right. It's updating live.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. More than 40 responses so far, close to 50.
That's cool. We want to have at least 50% of you respond, which is really good because then it'll give us a good feel.
Oh, that's great. We've had about 90 people, 90% respond.
Wow. So, gentlemen, it looks like we're almost neck and neck here. End of 2020, 40%, with 2021 at 48%. And I'm wondering, I have thoughts on these results. Probably something is this the close of the poll, Dan?
That's right, yeah.
All right then, so 2021 wins the race at the outset. Thanks to everyone truly for participating in that. So let's begin our conversation. Am I able to minimize? Yes. Alrighty, these are slides we hate to see in any of our businesses when they are this negative, everything downward trending. So Gavin, we're going to start with you. We're going to ask you, can you give us an overview of what's happened in the airline industry in the past few months? And that meaning, of course, since we clicked into 2020, since January, all of this news on carriers, fleets, route networks, etc. Can you give us some comments?
Thanks, Barbara. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Nice to talk to you all from the other side of the Atlantic. Today, I'm in Portugal. I think, Barbara, as you said in your introductory, this is unprecedented times. I think what obviously happened back in March for most of the airlines in Europe and North America was that we finally realized this was no longer a China problem. This was serious, and we needed to make some drastic decisions quickly. That meant that all airlines obviously were virtually grounding their aircraft, and as you see, we had around 85% of our fleets on the ground 2 weeks ago from today. That also mirrors what you've been having in North America. Obviously, there's been a little bit of domestic flying around the United States. You probably have seen that. You know, there is some optimism with what we're seeing now with China, and obviously China is 2 months ahead of us here in Europe, and probably going to be 4 months ahead of North America. Obviously, what we've seen now with China is a very strong push for the domestic market, and I think a lot of the analysts are saying to those airlines that are with a very strong domestic project, it's going to be easier to get the aircraft back up and running. And I think what we're seeing, if you jump a slide, Barbara, there's a very interesting position, because this is something for May. If we look at some results on capacity, what this is showing is what might be the end of June. Now, this was taken a week ago. What I'm now seeing is that we were highlighting that by the end of June, maybe we were about 20 to 25% down on the capacity like for like. This is capacity, obviously not knowing yet what demand will look like, but this is airlines putting the business back. And as our poll showed, 38% of the audience was proving that this year could still be with business. What I see in the last week is this has probably shifted a little bit. We're probably talking now about 30% down for the end of June. July and August, sitting here today, airlines are showing capacity reductions of about 6%. That's assuming that they haven't yet started to cancel. So we do know people like Ryanair have said that they won't put their flights back until July. Around 40% of the capacity of Ryanair will go back in July, up to 60% by August. So what you're seeing here is a position from airlines to say, we need to restart. We cannot continue to keep aircraft on the ground. Obviously, July and August in Europe, it's peak summer. Many airlines have got very positive bookings. Whilst flights are not yet cancelled, people are still waiting to know what to do. And of course, what we're saying in our industry, and obviously with having so many people from the trade with us today, the crucial role now is reassurance and information, because people need to know where they can go and what they can do. Because if airlines have got bookings and airlines will start flying, which is what these results or the numbers are showing, that by July we might have only 6% less capacity. Who knows whether or not in June airlines start to take further cuts. But at the moment there is a reason to get the lift back. Obviously, where can that lift go? And then where can the demand come from? So I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview. You know, we're talking about China at the moment with 1.5 million seats a day. Ryanair are talking around 1 million seats a day for July. Wizz Air at about 800,000 seats a day. So, you know, there is a movement to put lift back into the market. The question, and with this audience, is, are people going to travel? Because one thing is capacity, the other thing is demand. So the capacity will be there. Will the people jump back in? So I think that gives you a little bit of a flavor. It's been doom and gloom for sure. Those numbers, we're not hiding those numbers. Here we're seeing, is this a trend that's positive? Or is this airlines being bullish, putting capacity back, and then actually start cancelling 2 weeks before? We don't know. But at the moment, you know, we're talking about V curves, U curves, Bath curves. The question is that we have numbers. This is showing seats will be back. How do we stimulate demand? So I'll throw that back. Obviously, see if Robert would like to add anything to what I was just saying.
Thanks, Gavin. Obviously, what we're seeing in North America is a very similar trend, and obviously this is a second quarter 2020 story. While capacity for the first 6 months was off in combined North American market by about 30%, if we look at just the second quarter, which will end in June, you know, there will have been about a 65% capacity reduction amongst all carriers. The U.S. majors shouldering more of the burden of that, of about 70%. So it's quite a deep cut. Looking ahead to the third quarter, for July, August, and September, many of those schedules now loaded in the systems. What's really interesting is that while a lot of that has come back, amongst the three biggest US carriers, Delta has continued to cut the most for the summer months, the peak summer travel period. They've cut about 22% of their capacity for the summer. American 5%, United, the smallest of the majors, at 2%. Low-cost carrier group in North America combined about 9%. If we look specifically at the Canadian picture, you know, we've all heard of how Air Canada in the last month or so cut about 90% of its flying. If we look at the entire Canadian industry, both the major carriers as well as the low-cost carriers, this is fairly significant, close to 90%. For the second quarter, but less cuts as well here in Canada for the period July through September. Only about 25% capacity cut when we look at the summer months. Rouge, which had grounded its entire fleet, is showing signs of coming back with about 40% capacity cut. That's still quite significant. I think, Barbara, we have a slide somewhere that shows Rouge year over year for one of the peak summer months that shows how Rouge particularly has reduced its network. Air Canada mainline is going to be filling in some of those areas with lower cost capacity, particularly some of its newer airplanes, such as the 787. I think, Gavin, you'd mentioned that Portugal, yeah. Toronto to Lisbon was in fact a typical example of some of the strategy that Air Canada and Rouge are deploying together.
Exactly, Robert. I think, you know, if you look at what Lufthansa have announced with the reduction of their A340-600s, removing the 747-800s, it's a time now that most of the legacy airlines are taking some major changes to their fleets. Obviously, the last thing they want to be doing is flying with old aircraft if there are new aircraft are available. So I'm seeing, yeah, on the Lisbon route, it's a mainline service. You know, rather than bringing a 767, which probably got 25 years average age, they're going to put one of their 787-900s. It's just pretty much 280, 290 seat configuration. So you'll start to see this a lot with the legacy airlines moving to the new aircraft, obviously to serve, if not putting everything back at once. Why fly with the old gas guzzling machines when you can use the nice new aircraft that are available? So I think what Canada will see, and Rouge is a great opportunity for that.
Yeah, Rouge was a very good example because, I mean, they had basically grounded themselves in the last month. Again, Rouge mainly has an old fleet dating from the 1990s, 767s, A319s, A320s. And so given the fact that these aircraft are less fuel efficient, the simplest thing for them to do is to simply shut that down. We do see some capacity restarting, but a very North American and almost Caribbean focus to Rouge this summer, with very little, if any, international flying beyond North American borders. Other carriers are employing different strategies. Those that have very little debt are simply shuttering themselves until they feel that they can restart, until their market comes back. A good example of this is Porter Airlines. In fact, they just announced yesterday another month extension to their self-imposed grounding, if you will, until the end of July, as I understand now. And they're sort of taking a month-to-month position on this. Porter has no appreciable debt, having paid off their fleet. So they can wait and see. I mean, obviously, given as many on the call today will know, Porter has a very kind of closed route network that is heavily focused on the business traveler. And until they see real improvement in that particular market, they're not going to redeploy that capacity. You mentioned aircraft types. We noticed that a lot of carriers that have been taking delivery of newer planes, such as the Airbus A220, which is formerly the C series. This is a new technology airplane, very, very fuel efficient, can afford to fly with much lower load factors. And there's been a trend towards those carriers keeping the C series flying, be it Delta or Korean or Air Baltic, other companies that are taking delivery of these new airplanes. Are increasing the amount of flying that they can do with this aircraft because they're better able to withstand the shock of lower load factors in the current market.
So the sum of all of that was very, very great, is that it sounds like the carriers are really, in these months, they've been really taking advantage of the time, as painful as it was, to review and to see, as each day's news kept growing, how they can schedule, what they can do with their fleets. So their focus seems to be, if I can summarize, summer desires, looking to get some capacity in, get scheduling for the summer seems to be strong, both in Europe and planned for North America, less schedule reductions than we've seen, of course, in the past few months. And then looking, of course, what kind of aircraft they'd be using, kind of an impact it will have on their bottom line. Gavin?
Just to highlight, yeah, Barbara, I think, we're also still reliant on government travel patterns because, again, if we look at these numbers in June, if this is not, we can't just say that, for instance, the United Kingdom decided to make a quarantine during the first 2 weeks of June. That made a lot of EasyJet and Ryanair will be worried now. And of course, hence why Ryanair said, forget it, we're not going to really make any business move in June at all. Let's start with July. Jet2 did the same thing and said, let's push it all back now until July. EasyJet has come out and said, no, they'll do some business from their French bases, from their Swiss bases. But, all of a sudden, Germany is going to make their announcement in a couple of weeks if they can travel Denmark next week. So, all we can show here is that, yeah, airlines haven't yet started to cut because they don't know whether or not they can be flying. But the two things that are really important is confidence and, secondly, borders, because you can only go where you can go. And as soon as that can change, it makes it easy for the airlines then to really know what they have to cut and what can they keep. So taking statistics like this is one thing, but the reality is what might now happen, it depends on borders. So
true. Every single factor is so fluid. So let's move to our next question. If I can get there we go. Sorry, control problems here. This is the question that so many people were all discussing as passengers, as airline employees, airports, etc., is safety and hygiene. So, I mean, we've heard airlines saying that they're not envisioning a truly meaningful return to market until 2023. And of course, that's all concern about the health and how are they going to manage passengers to give them confidence to want to travel again. I mean, IATA has even mentioned that they're not really in favor of social distancing on the aircraft, and we've heard about the middle seat example. And as you just mentioned, Gavin, it's also critical. The government's opening and closing borders. It's all dependent on there. So how are customers going to feel confident in their travels and when they can go? And that will, of course, result in where airlines will put their fleet. So let's just talk about the management and how quickly this is progressed by the carriers. I mean, Robert, maybe we can just ask you to talk to the hygiene issue as a start.
Sure, thanks, Barbara. Obviously, it's evolving by the day. We're seeing a lot of carriers employing new technology in terms of sanitizing cabins, more frequent cleaning. This is going to demand quite a rethink on the airline's part. Carriers, maximize, profitability by maximizing fleet utilization. That means they have to fly their aircraft as frequently as they can and minimize the amount of time between those flights. This sort of turns that model on its head. If we're going to have to do, as an industry, more deeper cleans between flights, it's going to reduce the asset utilization, which could have down the road an impact on fares. So I do see the whole issue as sort of social distancing and cabin cleanliness as a bit of a stumbling point, but I think it's going to sort itself out. And IATA's position is totally understandable here. I mean, any forced reduction in capacity by governments would increase the airline's cost per available seat mile. This is, a measure of this is a typical airline economic measure that carriers live by. And of course, it's a bit of a catch-22. Governments have a need to protect citizens, but many governments are also being asked to bail out their carriers at the same time. So I think there's going to have to be some give and take here. But in the short term, I think this issue is going to sort itself out. The market will decide. Gavin had sort of raised the point earlier about, well, fewer people are traveling. I mean, that will have some impacts as well. And I think at the end of the day, airlines will be able to sort of say, at least in the short term, and market this, that they can perhaps block middle seats on aircraft, and that's just one example of a way that you can increase space on in the cabin, if the demand isn't there. And then I mentioned aircraft earlier that are perhaps particularly more economically advantageous for carriers. If the airlines can sort of figure out their particular situation and afford to reduce capacity, in that way, electronically blocking off seats or rows, then they will do that, and again they'll market that as a way of getting people to feel more comfortable about flying again.
It's a great point. Lots of really great points. Did you want to add anything to that, Gavin? I mean, we've seen so much already.
I think obviously this middle seats had quite a lot of publicity in the last weeks. I think, from an airline's point of view, the challenge is the next couple of months, because, we're talking about average load factors across the globe around 80%, and we're talking of low costs with load factors in the 90s. Now, as we said, if we don't know yet what is going to be cancelled in July and August, if you start cancelling flights in July and August with load factors with that kind of capacity, do you want to look for some amalgamations, putting flights together to try to take as many of the people who want to remain? And all of a sudden, if you have restrictions on middle seat, it's going to make it difficult for inventory to understand. Obviously, September, October, it may not be, as we go out of that peak summer, maybe the load factors were not as high immediately. So I think July and August is going to be a very interesting, as we say, if the airlines have got a significant amount of bookings, if they start cancelling, they've got to go down the line of the vouchers, etc. How are they going to move this project again in middle seats not being available? But of course, the last thing they want to be doing is getting bad social media of showing completely full aircraft. So I think there's going to be the next months are crucial, because of course it's restarting everything, seeing how people behave and how things are. And, it could be that I was seeing pictures, most people are saying flights they're on are not full. There's one or two exceptions when you see people posting, but my worry more now is July and August with what was supposed to be in the systems.
Again, it shows all of the additional thinking that needs to go on a day-by-day basis for each of these carriers as each of their flights are getting ready to depart. What are their factors? What are their safety standards to date? So we've seen too, a lot more scheduling has started to happen out of Canada, and it's been announced. So, and the airports, all of the efforts that they have to put in, just that one slide down there, that little picture that you're seeing on your screen, Air Canada has done some good communications, I have to say, on how their boarding process, check-in process, and in-flight process. So yes, that's a lot of effort, and I'm in concurrence with you, Rob, about the fact that this will all shake out. It's just a question of how quickly it will, and every demographic's level of comfort in how they're traveling. Let's move to the next question, which we had set as talking specifically about our Canadian market. And we have an awful lot of carriers in Canada for a geographically large country with really a small population, if we can say it like that. And we know Air Canada recently announced that it's going to lay off at least 20,000 passengers. And as we mentioned before, the types of aircraft that they're operating, both for mainline and for Rouge, Air Canada and WestJet both now have announced that they've lost $1.1 billion just in Q1 alone. So we have a lot of carriers in Canada, and the question and the concerns for a lot of us out there is, are we all going to make it? Because we've seen a number of declarations of bankruptcies, bankruptcy protection around the globe already. So Robert, if we can just ask you some input, your thoughts for our market.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. This has always been a challenging marketplace, you know, even in the best of times. I mean, it's long been said that Canada can always afford one large major carrier and then sort of one slightly smaller secondary carrier. As many of the viewers here today know, WestJet has been pushing the boundaries from its, you know, from inception and looking into move into new markets. It created a Q400 regional turboprop operation. It's since branched into longer haul with the 787. And as I said earlier, you know, 787 is going to be a very important tool for all of these airlines, you know, because it has sort of 21st century economics. It is a game-changing airplane for long haul. And its fuel efficiency is going to help the airlines recover, and certainly with lower load factors as well. There's one point, though, that is a bit of a fly in the ointment here for these carriers domestically, and that is the continued grounding of the 737 MAX. These carriers had staked a lot of their recovery on narrow-body fleet renewal with a sort of game-changing economics, if you will, of a 737 MAX, which is sort of a 21st century or 737 variant, if you will, with short-haul economics that are in line with sort of the long-haul economics of the new 787. And if Canadian carriers, both WestJet and Air Canada, were planning to sort of do this, you know, accomplish fleet renewal for their narrow-body fleets with the 737 MAX, if they can't bring that airplane back into service in an era of depressed demand, then having to continue to operate older Airbus fleets in the case of Air Canada and sort of mid-generation 737s in the case of WestJet is going to be a real challenge and a real drain. In terms of, you know, carriers at risk here, I mean, I would be concerned about one or two of the low-cost carriers. Again, their model is, as it is everywhere, is all about high density and you know, a lot of discretionary travel, people who are kind of visiting friends and relatives, as we like to call them. So those carriers that lean heavily on that kind of traffic are going to be struggling here for sure, and challenged to make that sort of pitch to the consumer about, you know, the comfort and assuredness and being able to return to the skies and not feel that you're in a cramped, you know, dense cabin environment. In terms of, you know, Air Canada, there was some news today that, you know, they're going to be applying for or forging ahead with a major refinancing, going to the public markets for new sources of capital. Certainly, I see that's something that's a promising move. That's something that Air Canada needs to look at with its global network. But I think it will get through this. How it comes through at the end is going to be interesting. We might see a downsized Air Canada, a more refocused Air Canada on mainly international routes. We'll have to wait and see how that shakes out for sure.
Yep, thanks. Gavin, did you want to put anything into our domestic market?
Can I do it a little bit differently than domestic, because it's not something I have a huge amount of insights on, but let me try and talk about Canada, and I'll bring in the US and the transatlantic if you don't mind, because I think obviously you've got, if you look at what we said before with Air Canada and Rouge, and obviously this merger that was supposedly going ahead with Transat. What Transat brings a fantastic project to Rouge. It brings, sorry, into Air Canada. It brings brand new or newish A330s and A321 long ranges that replace the 767s that are not really what Air Canada needs. So I think, you know, that there is certainly a synergy there that helps. I think one of the questions that you need to be asking yourselves in the market, both Canada and North America and US, is who's going to replace Norwegian? You know, what is going to happen to Norwegian? Because there was a lot of proposition put on this long-haul, low-cost opening of second airports. Norwegian has started to look at Halifax. They were doing the same in Providence, etc. So all of a sudden, you had this vision of we can fly $99, 99 euros between secondary cities in Europe and North America. And, you know, last week, Bank of China basically became one of the biggest owners through the leasing company of Norwegian. Will that restart? Nobody knows. But, you know, WestJet was trying to do that, you know, looking at secondary airports, A321 long ranges coming in. JetBlue is now talked about opening Boston, JFK into London. If you look at the European projects, Eurowings, which was part of Lufthansa, it's pretty much being scrapped. Will IAG keep the Level project that they were doing out of Barcelona and Paris? Will that get scrapped? You know, is there a movement here for WestJet to take the new position of Norwegian, drop down into North America, into the US, and start building up a vision of secondary airports from East Coast, North America to Europe, that what Norwegian, but if Norwegian couldn't make it work, could WestJet make it work? You know, what was wrong with Norwegian to not make that? Because again, is this a project? Do we see transatlantic coming back quickly? That's another question for another audience, but because all of a sudden you've got here Canada and Transat coming together potentially, WestJet has a huge opportunity to be the replacement if a Norwegian doesn't come back until 2022, if there's a market to go back again for the transatlantic with the low-cost model, because the Ryanair and EasyJet are not going to do it. And I say, if Air France KLM have not talked about developing anything, Eurowings and Level, let's see if they continue or not. JetBlue are trialing something. Is it a gap? Is there a gap for this to come back? Or would Norwegian prove that you can't make it work?
Mind expanding thoughts. Thank you for that. Yes, we will have some, it seems still, as we say, we're in the fertilizer. It's a lot of questions without any immediate answers. It's all dependent on so many factors. And let's not forget, yes, that whole comment about the US, because of course the borders between Canada and US have been suspended yet until the 21st of June. So a lot of our carriers obviously did a lot of traffic transborder as well. So Robert, we're going to come to those two slides that you mentioned. So here are the year over year from July for Air Canada, and the follow-on is from Rouge. Did you want to speak to that just quickly?
Yeah, just that there's some, you know, at sort of this this scale, it may be sort of hard to discern a little bit, but on the left you have, you know, Air Canada's network peak summer 2019, on the right the equivalent for 2020. Interesting to see, obviously, cutbacks in a lot of the international markets, particularly, and also some interesting redeployments. We were using the example earlier of how, you know, some markets that Rouge may have served previously are being replaced with more efficient mainline Air Canada equipment.
Yep, and the next slide is in fact Rouge.
Yeah, so this is quite, you know, a dramatic change of direction for Rouge. They've completely pulled out of pretty much all of their international, save for, the Caribbean and Mexico. They're keeping, the international routes were 767, older 767 models. They're not terribly fuel efficient. And those aircraft are amongst many images that we see parked in the deserts of the US Southwest right now. So what we have here basically are sort of the slightly more fuel efficient A319, A320 types that are being deployed, probably more A320s than not, into, mainly focused on North America and the Caribbean.
And these are actually schedules, are they? These, this is the net.
This is actual scheduled data that we pulled yesterday, that's correct.
Work scheduling plan for, all right. Remarkable. So let's go to the world. Let's talk about then, how is it possible? How can all these conversations about aircraft types, et cetera, and what borders are opening and which ones aren't? I mean, let's talk about how do these airlines, especially the legacy, the large international ones, how can they start, how are they thinking to begin rebuilding their networks, right? Their routes, of course, are dependent on so many factors. And first and foremost, I don't know if it's fair to say first, passenger demand, is that first? There's slot times, there's network, there's fleet size, there's fleet availability, it's local taxes, given how much money they're losing, and then what borders are open or which ones are closed. So how are they thinking? Well, how would you think if you were the CEO? So Gavin, can we start with you? Can you give some comments?
I think, there are completely different schools here. If, the domestic, I talk China, if you look China, India, and the United States, take those as the three biggest domestic markets in the world. If I was a CEO of an airline in one of those three markets, I would be a lot more happier than being CEO of Lufthansa, because I can start pretty much now. India is coming back this week, China's back, the US not just yet, but all of a sudden you've got the parameters that you're working with are a lot easier. So I think, what we've found is a lot of research has been looking at what is happening now in the domestics. Does that mirror what will happen internationally? And it doesn't. If I take China as an example, China domestic is growing. There are numbers for the May holiday, the May Labor Day, start of May, where their actual capacity was higher than the capacity for the May of 2019. If you look at their international links, it's nothing. There's very limited international travel out of China. So domestic and international are not mirroring each other. So if you're an airline that's working a hub and spoke project, how do you fulfill the route on one leg without the other? So, this is why Ryanair can say, I can put 40% of my capacity back in July, and in August, September, I can put 60. By April, I can be back to 100%. Lufthansa can't do that because it's waiting. When is the US opening? When is a certain other market opening? So all of a sudden, the question is, do they want to put routes on point to point and then compete with the low cost with much higher unit costs? So, they don't really want to be parking aircraft. Again, we're parking aircraft at the moment. I was reading the other day, I think the biggest car park at the moment is Istanbul Airport. I mean, Istanbul Airport, you can't leave aircraft there for months. The corrosion on the wings with the humidity, so I can't just leave aircraft in the middle of commercial airports. So we've got to get things back up and running. And it's just how it can be done where you've got multiple, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, one fits somewhere else. That's why I say it's not an easy position for these airlines at the moment. If you're focused on domestic, you know what you can do. If you've got to bring the jigsaw together, I think the challenge is then, looking at certain trunk routes, of course, the major cities that will connect for sure. And that's why, some of the secondary airports, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get them up and running as fast as maybe they would like, because you won't know what the demand might be on the secondary development. So I'm not trying to skim around the answer, but I think that it's not easy. It's not easy. And as we've said, we just need to see what the next months bring. Do people start to come back? We just don't know. If you talk to you listen to Wizz Air, the CEO has been quite outspoken that this is anybody below 45, jump on an aircraft, we're ready for you. Wizz Air have opened a new base in Abu Dhabi. They've started to say if Virgin Atlantic and British Airways is going out of Gatwick, give me the slots. We'll put 5 or 6 aircraft tomorrow in Gatwick. We can do that. And so, you've got one side of the story saying we want to use an opportunity to grow. And other airlines are saying we really don't know what the next months can bring because we can't just focus on point to point. That's not our game. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time for those airlines to really redevelop their network to bring the jigsaw puzzle back together.
The hurry up and wait program. Goodness. Robert?
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, the challenge is for the majors, the major carriers networks here. The model that has basically evolved over the last several decades is one of hub and spoke. And but what I find interesting as well is that there are a number of new aircraft types, and we've talked about them earlier, be it the Airbus A220, the A350, the Boeing 787. These are aircraft were actually designed to be very strong performers point to point in medium-sized markets that perhaps don't rely as much on connecting feed. I think demand for those airplanes is going to surge in the short term for those carriers that can certainly afford to place big aircraft orders or accelerate retirement of older aircraft. And we might start to see more of a hub bypass strategy. It comes with its own challenges, but it'll be very interesting to see how that playing field evolves. Yeah.
Well, the concept of travel bubbles, as we've heard for, say, in Australia, New Zealand, is that then restricted to the carriers of those regions? Those are thoughts as well?
Yes, it's a little bit difficult because obviously
the sound cut out there for a second. Gavin, are you, I believe you might be having internet issues. Gavin, can you hear us okay?
I think you froze up, you're right.
Yeah, that means that means the internet got dropped on his end.
Alrighty, so
Darn.
Robert, shall we leave the travel bubble, or do you want to make a quick comment about the concept? Do you see
I would add that, I mean, in the case of Canada and the United States, if we want to look at that as a potential bubble, and of course, there's still a lot of sensitivities about the Canada-US border right now in terms of opening up trade and expanding travel. There is a lot of demand, obviously, for cross-border. Toronto, New York is the largest transborder market in North America, and there's going to be a lot of interest amongst the airlines to restart those routes. Yes. Into their respective hubs, but at the same time, if the demand for domestic isn't really there, I mean, look, Air Canada has staked a lot of its future expansion in being able to feed Toronto from pretty much everywhere in North America, not just Canada. To remind people that Air Canada's Toronto hub strategy is all about taking passengers from smaller or medium-sized US cities, not just the big cities, and connecting them over to Toronto to an international network without ever actually having to enter Canada. And that model has worked very well for Air Canada. Going forward, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. If people want to continue to use the benefits of connecting over Canada to save money, to save time, versus connecting over the traditional US hubs. We'll have to see how that strategy plays out.
Yep.
Sorry, Barbara. Yeah, no, I lost you for 1 minute. I don't know what happened. So sorry, I was just, I think Robert was, thank you for stepping back in. No, I think the question was, it's not easy, but let's see. Certainly there was talk of this, there was some, Qantas were looking at a new project of opening London, Sydney, but I know that they've now put that on hold. They've said, no, they're not moving ahead with that project. So I think Robert was absolutely right. The A350 opens up doors in the kind of the 7 to 13 hour flights, and the A321 long range from the 6 to 9 hour that could bring back a lot of this point to point. And then of course what happens with the Middle East, there was there was an interesting discussion last week with on Quest Means Business with the CEO of Etihad. He was asked, is there a merger on the line with Emirates? To create probably the biggest airline in the world, to put something that, are they worried that there will be more and more point-to-point traffic that might have an impact?
Yeah, seems like all cards on the table. We have to keep our eyes on the headlines still. Well, let's move to travel agents. Let's move to the retail landscape. So how and where do agencies fit into all of this talk of point-to-points, hubs, aircraft types, destinations? I mean, when you think about the agency side, there's corporate agencies, online travel agencies, mobile travel agents, consolidators, consortia, meeting planners, tour operators. There's all these retailers that are selling air seats, which have literally evaporated. And so right along with that, their extra business and core businesses in many cases, cruise, resort sales, attractions, meetings and events, all things tourism. Airlines truly are the linchpin for so many agencies. So how would you see the agencies, the agency community, and all the technology tools, let's say even, that they have to deal with? How are they fitting into this new world? What opportunities do you see for agencies with the airlines? Gavin, do you want to take that one?
I think if we go back to the end of 2019, a lot of airlines were very optimistic about the relationship with the trade. The B2B project, the development of NDC, was all about trying to put content directly to the travel agent and allow the travel agent to really work with a closer relationship with the airline. So, and as we know, cost of distribution through the GDS has been expensive. So the reality of how can we work closer with the agent on one side of the story, and obviously on the online direct on the other. And I think, as I said earlier, now an airline should be really wanting to work with the trade, because you the trade are the ones sitting with potential passengers, potential bookings. What are you telling them? How can you reassure them? And I think there's, the whole role of the travel agent now is about reassurance, support, and the airlines should be using that as a very important channel to get out their messages and work in a strategic way with travel agents. I think the opposite is, maybe some people have had some negative challenges with getting, if things have been cancelled and I was with an OTA, what actually happened? Was it easy to get response? That's where the travel agents have a huge part to play, I believe. I don't see any difference, more good opportunities working with the airlines. It would be better if the airlines should be smart to think about what the travel agent can bring in the next, in the immediate term and the short term immediately, and in the medium term, building up confidence together.
I agree wholeheartedly, Gavin. In fact, there was already interesting anecdotal evidence over the last several years building this new sort of younger generation that's coming into the travel world that is looking for experiential travel, also very busy. Both partners, partners may be working full time, raising families, just don't have the time to plan out these things. They're looking for expertise, they're looking for experience. And I see this as an amazing opportunity to almost hit the reset button in terms of how we envision the travel professional in the value chain for a client's experience. And I think I'll be these sort of long, uncertain days over the next few months with people perhaps waiting around for that volume to come back. What they should be thinking about right now, using this time to sort of think about their brand and how they can better market themselves to the consumer going forward. Because what we saw, and you point out, I mean, dealing with an OTA through this entire experience, trying to get refunds, vouchers, what have you, has been terribly, terribly stressful on people. And we've heard, there's been wonderful accolades for travel agent community and how they've been, sitting on the phone for hours on end, assisting consumers to rebook and or in cases, get refunds, where they can. So the value cannot be, the value is there, and I think it's important for the agency community to use this time to start thinking about how they can build their brand into this sort of almost, I would say, new era, forthcoming era of travel, where I think they're going to play an ever increasing role.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And I can tell you too, just from personal experience, exactly right. The agents are having this opportunity where they're really showing their value. I think from the reset, I love that word. I think there might be a rethink over fees as well, because there is just so much value in working with an agent, not only through these wretched times of trying to get your money back and to manage your credits, refunds, whatever you're at, but the planning part. And I see a lot of agents putting out the dreaming messaging going on right now. You can't do this, but you sure can soon do this. So yeah, it's lovely. That's great. All right, well then, let's move to the future. Let's talk about the future. What's it going to look like? What is it going to look like? We have created, I think, more questions than we have answers, but at least we've thought about a lot of things. So with all the lasting impacts, for example, after 9/11, closing, locking of the cockpit doors, the huge securities that we all go through now daily as a normal daily experience at airports, those things are all part of our daily lives. So what can we imagine? What can we look forward to? What do we think travel might be in the next year, 2, 5 years? What will the world look like? I want to say post-COVID, or maybe it's a smaller COVID going in the future, but what can the world look like? Robert, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure, Barbara. I think in the short term, obviously, carriers are going to have to work with what they have in terms of their cabins. It can take months to plan and re-envision a cabin environment. And again, we're dealing with aircraft, although there have been step changes into the propulsion, fuel efficiency. We're basically dealing with a concept that has evolved post World War II in terms of the way we think of an airline cabin and the way we, configure the cabin. And obviously with the advent of low cost and now ultra low cost carriers, the economy cabin has been, is seeing higher and higher density. At the same time, though, we have seen premium cabins expand. So the economy cabins have shrunk, and people who travel in the economy cabins are seated a lot more closely together. I think in the short term, carriers are going to have to play with the economics. It'll basically be a pay per use type scenario where carriers will seek to sell more upgrades to people as opposed to giving them away as freebies. Perhaps the amount of frequent flyer premium reward or reward capacity will shrink as carriers will seek to upsell consumers into premium cabins. You'll pay for more distance between you and your seatmates. Longer term, I think there will probably be some major rethink of the cabin environment, and that will come with new technology. Some of which is on the drawing board, and some which I think will come out of necessity, out of the times we're in right now. I think if you're at Airbus and Boeing, you're starting to think about pushing forward designs for new aircraft, if you have the capital to do so, because these projects cost billions of dollars and require many years of lead time. But that's sort of how I see things shaping up, short versus the longer term.
Gavin.
I suppose, it comes back to the question, when may there be a vaccine? Will that change everybody's behavior, and we'll go back a little bit to what we had? I mean, if we go back to the end of 2019, the industry was in a good position. Yes, we had talked about consolidation. Yes, we had talked about too much capacity on the transatlantic. Yes, we talked that the Chinese was the next hotspot. what will change, I suppose, will have an impact on the developments of the industry. China is pretty much ready to start moving again. Are we ready to work that project? They're not, as I mentioned about the transatlantic, can somebody step in and try and do what Norwegian and WOW Air both have tried and have failed, which is to move people across the Atlantic at a fare that can work and open up a whole new segment of the consumer, or has that gone and we're going to put travel a little bit back to what it used to be, and when prices go back to, not everybody travels as much as they've been doing so I think it's hard to say. I mean, I think will we change dramatically? I can't see that. I don't, there's not any new vision of, I think, we talked about flying 20 hours. That seems to be now put on hold. So I think it's being in a position at the moment to really look at costs, understand what that means in relation to the next couple of years. I think there will be there's going to be a very different battlefield as we move out of the summer. You've got airlines, Lufthansa, the Air France's, Alitalia's being given a lot of money. But that means they're starting with huge debts. You're talking about airlines with debts that they've never had before. So, they can't just go and start acquiring other airlines or doing seat sales, because they're going to owe a lot of money. So we're going to move into a period where the airlines will remain, but they're starting with debts that they've never had. And so, all of a sudden the market will be a little bit unstable in the first year of operations, because you're going to have those airlines that haven't been receiving, those that have. What will happen with price? Will price drive demand? We know after September 11th, price was quite an easy way to put people back. It seems at the moment, looking at fares through summer and fall, I'm not seeing discounts. Of course, airlines are not promoting. They're not really started yet to put the promotion back. Still a little bit whilst people are not working. They have to be careful. But, yes, some of the low costs have said there will be a battle, because if the airlines that are using state aid as a way to reduce fares will reduce fares even more. So there is talk that there might be some price wars, but at the moment we're not seeing that. Airlines are not making huge price campaigns at the moment to fill seats in September and October. They don't really know yet what that load might look like, what capacity it may have. So it's all a little bit difficult. I think for me, the next 3 months, obviously for us in the Northern Hemisphere, are crucial, because this is our busiest time. We're moving into winter, which is an area where most airlines suffer. So, this is the time we've really got to understand what happened during the next 3 months. Did we see capacity come back, and did we see demand follow? Or did we just end up cancelling a lot of flights on a revolving 2-week period, which is what we're probably now going to start seeing? Every 2 weeks cancel, every 2 weeks cancel. And that's no good for travelers, it's no good for agents, it's no good for their own brand image. So that's why I had to say, if we can get demand back, and that's through the right messages, the right communication, destinations, the way tourism develops itself, travel agents supporting, maybe we can build a little bit of confidence back. I think the numbers showed it took 10 months to come back after September 11th, and about 16 months after the financial crisis. So I'm not going to say we've been here before, because this is completely different. But I think it's trying to now see what might happen in the next months. The vaccine obviously makes a difference. Until that, you're still in this kind of not sure mode.
If I could just add one thing too, Barbara, there's an image in the center of this particular slide, which shows a private aircraft. We here at Elevate work in private aviation. That's one of the other things that we do, and we arrange private flights for clients. There was a recent article that came out in Forbes magazine which was titled, and I encourage everyone to read it, "The 60 Days That Have Changed Private Air Travel Forever." Suddenly, private air travel is gaining a lot of interest. It's not for everyone. It still remains costly. There is obviously a wide gap between the premium cabins on commercial airliners and flying private. But what is very interesting is that there's a statistic that shows that only about 10% of those people who can afford to travel on private aircraft actually do so. And private air travel is, again, it's an economic choice, just like anything else. There are ways to lower the cost of flying private by sharing the aircraft with friends and family. And that's one of the things that we do. So if there are those who are on the call today who are interested in learning more about that, I would encourage them to go to our website, elevatecharter.com. And we've got some interesting articles on there as well about how much it costs to fly private, and other articles that help to demystify the process.
That's great. Thank you. That's really valid too, because as you're both talking, I'm just thinking about different mindsets. There's people, they're at different economic levels. They are at different personal safety thinking. I think about 9/11 and who were the first demographics that returned, and that was the youth. That was the student market. It just took off, fearless. This is definitely different than that. But looking at and listening to considerations about costs of airfares, it does certainly make me wonder. To do an empty middle seat comes at a cost. Sitting at premium economy is a cost. If I'm a safety concern, maybe I'm going to be traveling less per year, and private is the way to go. So I really love all of these conversations, this thinking. We'll just have to see, and I'm sure that's what the airlines are agonizing about, is what kind of food are they going to put on the table for the consumer to bring them back? What's going to get them going? So we are, those were our discussion points. We're going to run that poll again now. I'm just curious to know how people feel after this conversation. Just the same questions again. If you can just let us know, are you still feeling that it'll come back sometime in 2021, 22, 23? And we've seen a lot of carriers say 23, I believe, mostly because their comments are a meaningful market.
So here we go. The results are coming in now. You guys should see that up on your screen now. Just vote for one of those 4 options.
Yeah, that's very
Last
cool.
time, yeah, last time, let's see. Well, before discussing it, I'll allow another 20 seconds for people to vote. Yeah, interesting. The first time I ran this, definitely a majority said 51%. 51% of people voted for 2021. And now I'll just end this and share the results. So there we go. So now an even higher majority still says 2021.
At the expense of 2020?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and I do know for a fact that most agencies, they are seeing bookings for 2021 for cruises, for holidays, you know, and a lot of that is also, from my understanding, is because the suppliers are offering it with total flexibility to be able to change the date, refundable. I have to say, I've even been caught up in that wonderful offer too. So. All right, so Dan, I guess
the problem with that, Barbara, is obviously the airline's inventory for 2021. There, you're taking inventory and giving it at 0 revenue because they've already banked the money from this year, and now they're taking a seat for next. So, if you're an airline revenue management person, this is the worst thing that can happen, because your inventory will get reduced on the basis that you're delaying people to travel. So it's what I said before, you know, there are a lot of bookings in the system. And I think this is why airlines are reluctant to start canceling just yet, because they don't know. And that's why if they cancel, they have to give the refund or the voucher or move people. If you start moving inventory from this summer to next summer, your revenue generation is going to be reduced. So you still got costs. So you can see why they're taking this kind of, they're not canceling yet.
This is a wicked soup. Yes, thank you for that. All right, so let's go to our question and answer period, if we can say that. I think we have a few questions. Dan, have you been monitoring them?
Yes, I have. So a few have come in. The first was from Jose, who asks, I was wondering what level. Now, keep in mind, this question was submitted towards the start of the webinar. But he asked, was wondering what level of return to travel are we discussing? Will people accept the new norm of travel with restrictions on airliners, hotels, cruises, etc.?
I mean, that is the wild card too. That's a whole nother 2 or 3 webinars, isn't it? Knowing, okay, I can fly there. What happens when I get to the other end? Because I do know that Hong Kong, as an example, is requiring it's a delay. You have to be screened before they allow you to enter the country. And I've heard of waits of up to 8 hours. I've seen people having to sit in chairs waiting to be screened before they can enter. How are the hotels, the cruise lines, all of the things we want to go on holiday for? How's that? So I'm not sure. Do either one of you even want to try answering that? Yes.
Well, I mean, I think people. I mean, look, in the era of information technology, people are doing their homework, and if they see that there's such high barriers to entry, they're going to go, well, this isn't fun. Why am I even bothering to do this? I'm not going to put my family through this. So that's why I fear here that people are going to continue to sit on the sidelines until such a time that taking a leisure trip at least is not going to be a painful experience. And again, for those who can afford it, there are alternative service delivery. I spoke to one just a few minutes ago. Those who can afford to do so, or hook up with friends and others to share the cost, will travel perhaps by private aircraft in a way that they would have never have imagined before. And we're getting so many inquiries by people who want to know how to do this, because in fact, what it does is it gets people around all of this hassle. There's no standing in lines. There's no terminal buildings to deal with. Customs formalities are performed on board the aircraft. And frankly, if you're going to be inadmissible, you find out before you even leave the airport of departure from the country of origin. So you don't have to be put through the post-arrival surprises, if you will. It's out there. It's always been there, but it's never had much of a profile, and it may be increasingly of interest to some people who can afford to do it once in a while.
Yep. Dan, have you got another question for us?
Yes, absolutely. So let's see. So we have a couple of comments. Andrew said, on airline capacity, many airlines have yet to take their H2 capacity out of the GDS and are doing this on a monthly basis. This is why you're seeing 6% to 30% decrease in capacity in June, which is not a true picture.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Is what I was saying before, that airlines, it's probably more likely going to be a 2-week rolling. You go to the websites now of most airlines, they're selling tickets for July and August. That's so the capacity numbers I was showing, or we were showing earlier, as I said, the reflection here is that the airlines are still willing. They want to know if people will travel before they cancel. If they cancel, they've got to refund 100%. Let's be honest. It's either refund vouchers or reposition for another day. If they go ahead and people don't show, you're a no-show. If the government say it's safe to travel, it's up to the passenger. And I think that's why, yes, we're seeing capacity numbers that are looking very high. I said in July, it's only showing 6% down. That's not realistic. It is what was said in this comment. It isn't realistic, but this is what we're saying. Capacity is not a reflection of what will be demand, but it's proving that the airlines are telling themselves, look, we've got bookings. So we're not prepared to throw everything away if there are people willing to travel. We just don't know yet. We at the moment we know you can't travel because there are blocks. But once those blocks are opened, we as the airline cannot cancel. If we cancel, we have the limitations. So we will travel if it's safe. If the countries that we're traveling to are safe and the country we're leaving from is open, theoretically, and we have bookings in the system, we will go. Now, if anybody turns up, and some of the work I said before about China, if you look at some of there's a lot of cancellations on the same day. So there's a lot of, and that brought that middle seat discussion back in again, that if you've got 4 flights a day on a certain route, you might fly once and put everybody on one flight. So there will be some amalgamations of flights to try to take as many people as they can out of the system. Blanket cancellations in July and August, it's going to be very worrying from an airline's point of view. But flying without passengers, I don't see any airlines really expecting to be selling new tickets in July and August. They're flying to take what's already been booked. They will look now, September, October, any late summer. And as I said, they're not marketing yet, but they'll push it for, summer 21 will be the next, if there's going to be a price drop and start stimulating some new demand. But I'm not seeing airlines think they're going to get bookings in July and August. If they fly, it's because those bookings are already in the system. And they want to shift, they want to get the flights back up again. So I agree with the comment. It's not real, but it's real to what the airlines are doing. They're putting capacity in the system and then taking it out 2 weeks before.
Right. And that brings us to the next comment that was submitted here that said, it's like a circle / a dead end. I have clients willing to travel, but there are no flights. The airlines want to fly, but they do not have clients.
Which probably maybe I've answered that a little bit the same way. I think at the moment it's difficult because there are not flights, because you've got government restrictions. I think that's why, if I'm looking from a European point of view, we're pretty much going to be open from the middle of June. We were supposed to really but because of the British situation, many airlines are connecting in or out of the UK. Europe has kind of said, well, Spain, Portugal, etc. Ryanair, EasyJet, Jet2. Well, if the UK is on quarantine until the middle of June, there's no point flying. So we've had to cancel another set of flights and really start Europe in July if there's a UK in or out on that leg, because you're not going to have a holiday and go home and spend 2 weeks quarantined at home. Makes no sense.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely. And the next question submitted here was, what do you think about the Sabre / LH contract ending?
It's about saving money. NDC, moving direct to talk to the agent in a different way. It has to be. It's all about looking at cost reductions on the distribution. And that's where, the NDC and Lufthansa was very strong in their NDC development and try to talk to agents in a different way.
Okay. And Denise asks, what are the airlines' thoughts on immunity passports? Clients have a COVID test within 14 days of departure.
May come to that. We don't know. Depends on, there are some locales, particularly I'm thinking now small island nations that are going to be very adverse to exposing any of their local populations to this, perhaps requiring that. I know prior to the Canadian government's imposition of travel advisories, there were various countries that, in fact, and I'm thinking small island nations, that were in fact requiring doctor's notes to certify that people were at that time didn't require necessarily a COVID test, but sort of a clean bill of health. That they were at least not showing any signs of the illness. And we may in fact see more and more of that in the coming months as some of these places want to reopen because they're so reliant on tourism. That wouldn't surprise me in the least.
Mm-hmm. And Denise asks, if a passenger fails the temperature test and denied boarding, will the airline provide that passenger with a flight credit? I'm sure that depends on a number of factors.
That would likely be carrier specific, right? And I would think that they'd also turn to insurances, insurance coverage. I don't know where that stands today. That would be my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I would come back to the insurance as well going forward. I mean, again, this is one of these sort of turning points in air travel. Clients should need to have the necessary insurance. And of course, in fairness to the insurance, I mean, it has to be offered, right? Because we've heard stories too about insurance companies reneging on certain things, or, you know, it has to be very clear. The policies have to be clear, but I think, again, consumers need to be better armed with that knowledge. Cancel for any reason type insurance, you know, maybe the new frontier.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robert. And Jenny says, I just got a request for a YYZ/CPH flight in August. Should I tell my client to rethink this or book the best I can and hope for the best?
That's Toronto, Copenhagen.
Yeah.
Right, Copenhagen, yeah.
Copenhagen or Denmark will make an announcement on Friday on their travel restrictions. So maybe if you could hold a day, 2 days. Being honest, obviously, if you book it and the airline cancels, the customer will be offered you'll have that fight on the refund voucher again. So you're going to have to play that potential issue. It's quite an important route. I wouldn't see why the airline wouldn't fly it. August, they say, looks like the travel Friday. The Danish government will make their announcement on when they allow people to travel. So you won't get a better price. That won't change. Fares are not going to go down next week. So if you book it now, the worst scenario is you'll have a voucher. That's the negative. More than likely it would go, but you won't get a seat sale between now and August. No, there's no reason to. I said airlines, they're not going to be marketing now whilst they've got employees still on furlough, etc., receiving money from governments. It's the last thing they want to be doing, to be going out buying media to say cheap tickets. It's against the principles of why they're being, or why money's being lent. So you just don't know. But maybe certainly wait till Friday, because Denmark will make an announcement on Friday.
That sounds like good advice. Thanks, Gavin. Denise says insurance will no longer cover COVID-19 because it is now a known event. What are your thoughts on that?
It's always difficult with insurance. Yeah, they'll always try to somehow not cover something. That's an issue. I think but that probably will be taken up by your civil aviation and in Canada. Or how would it work? Presumably the consumer and civil aviation would have to look at that. What can be covered under insurance?
I honestly, I don't even know how to answer that question, quite honestly. I mean, we have ACTA who lobbies for agencies, and I'm sure that they would go right up to governmental to push for it, because it would seriously be an issue if COVID was a concern that someone contracted it during travel, if that's what the question is, or either on the aircraft or at the destination. I mean, it's like any insurance issue over health, the ability to get someone home again. So yeah, I wouldn't even have an answer for that either.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yep.
And Matilda asks, do any of you have a favorite website to view which countries are open or closed?
Oh.
I don't, to be honest. I normally just Google each country and see what it's saying, but there probably is one. I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't help you with that.
I can chime in there. In the business and private aviation world, we actually use, well, there's a couple. You can use the European Business Aviation Association's website, EBAA, and I'll try and get the link up for people. They have a very detailed region by region, country by country breakdown, which is updated fairly regularly with the latest travel health advisories and requirements as well for entry. And I'll post that here.
Super. And that one is
Thanks,
European centric?
It is actually global. It's the EBA basically collects and consolidates that information for the whole world.
Bless them. This is a great question.
Absolutely. And Denise, you probably saw this already, but Robert just typed his email address in the chat box there. So you'll see that just in the chat box, support@elevatecharter.com.
Well, we've gone quite over time, which is great. Great conversation.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, it's for a topic like this, it's no problem at all. But I do think that's it for the submitted questions. Yeah, let me just double check here. Oh yeah, and Jenny says thanks to Gavin for the advice. Thank you so much for that. She says you make good sense.
Good luck.
So yeah, that's it for the submitted questions. But I'd like to thank all the agents that tuned in today and all the travel professionals that took time out of their day to attend this webinar. And thank you so much to Barbara, Robert, and Gavin. It was great having you, and this has been a fantastic discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So can we end on this cool video? I mean, people can choose to leave, or if you want 4 minutes of an upbeat, and Gavin brought up Wizz Air recently, who said, give us your Gatwick slots. We will put on a flight wherever needed. This is a young hip hop happening airline out of Budapest. So we'll run the video and say thank you.
Great. That sounds perfect.
Yeah, let me see what I can do about that. Here we go.
Oh, there we go. I see it loading.
Excellent.
Celebrate.
Yeah, that's a really positive message. You know, let's stay optimistic and let's hope for the best.
That's
Thank you
right.
so much, Barbara, and thank you, Gavin and Robert, as well. It was great having you.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciated the opportunity. Let's do it again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care.